Ed Sullivan ran the biggest variety show on TV for 20 years, but he was infamous for banning guests who crossed him even once. Some musicians played inappropriate lyrics when told not to, while one guest even gave him the middle finger live. These are 10 performers Ed Sullivan banned for life. Number 1. Jackie Mason.
Are you busy? I'll tell you the whole story. I think I finished with that guy.
During Mason's 1964 appearance, Ed Sullivan was visibly rushing him to finish early because they had to cut to an important presidential address from Lyndon B. Johnson. But Mason didn't care and started mocking Sullivan's hand signals on camera and did the unthinkable by flipping him off in front of millions of viewers.
A Gentile saw me by the name of Ed Sullivan, and he loved me. He watched me perform at my first audition, and he got so excited. He was shocked, so shocked that the rest of his life he walked around like this.
Mason denied doing it and said the whole thing was misunderstood, but Sullivan saw it as complete disrespect and breach of control of his show. He banned him immediately after the incident and became a career-altering controversy for Mason years afterward. He later sued Sullivan in court for $3 million, alleging the accusation defamed his image and reputation. He won the case with official court documents stating he was acquitted of the accusation soon after, but the ban still stuck.
Did you know that? You don't have to have 1 minute's experience. Did you know that? Did you know anything at all that I'm talking about?
Number 2. Bob Dylan. Dylan was scheduled to appear and perform Talkin' John Birch Paranoid Blues as his opening. The song was controversial, as it depicted multiple U.S. government officials as communists, but Sullivan approved anyway. CBC, on the other hand, heavily disapproved of the lyrics right before cameras rolled, as they feared a defamation lawsuit tied to the John Birch Society. The show and Sullivan now wanted him to switch to something safer, essentially a last-minute rewrite of the segment. But Bob wouldn't negotiate and chose to leave instead of performing. Viewers that night never got to see him perform, leaving Ed and producers rushing to find someone to replace his segment. Producers on set decades later allegedly said this pissed off Sullivan in a way they'd never seen. Because of his show's strict timing, he couldn't just walk on stage live and explain the situation or what Dylan had done.
Williams and Singer killed poor Hattie Carroll with a...
Number 3. The Doors. When The Doors came on in September 1967, the producers wanted one specific line in Light My Fire to be cut because it seemed like a clear remark surrounding substance use. The original agreement was that they would avoid the word higher while live. But once the cameras were rolling, Jim Morrison delivered the lyric anyway in the middle of the performance. Sullivan didn't see this as accidental, but purposely ignoring direct instructions while millions of families were watching at home. Sullivan was reportedly furious, and the group was banished forever after that night. Morrison knew exactly what he was doing when he sang that line. He looked right into the camera and said it anyway. Sullivan took it personally as a calculated insult to his authority. The Doors became legends partly because of moments like this where they refused to compromise. Number 4. Jefferson Airplane.
In the only way that it's granted in a way.
Jefferson Airplane appeared and performed songs including The Crown of Creation and Won't You Try. According to the Ed Sullivan Show's own write-up, the group was never invited back, mostly because they refused to change their wardrobe to fit the show's expectations. The point of tension wasn't a single lyric like some other acts, it was the band's refusal to be managed aesthetically by the production. Their image and the era's psychedelic styling created immediate friction with what producers thought was acceptable for prime time. After that conflict, they weren't brought back, which functions as a de facto blacklist, even if it wasn't announced publicly. In short, the show wanted conformity, and the band refused, and the relationship ended there. Jefferson Airplane represented everything Sullivan's show was trying to keep off the air. Their whole vibe clashed with the wholesome family entertainment Sullivan demanded.
They cannot tolerate our minds in loyalty.
Number 5. Orson Bean. Ed's problem with Bean wasn't an on-air incident. It was the Red Scare blacklist climate and sponsor network caution around anyone suspected of similar associations. Bean described being blacklisted and said an Ed Sullivan appearance was canceled because of that status, with Sullivan later rebooking him when he could. Bean also recalled Sullivan's explanation that the pressure came from the sponsor ecosystem, often summarized as, "It was Campbell's Soup that did the blacklisting, not CBS." That framing matters because it suggests Sullivan wasn't always personally officially leading the exclusion, but he still complied with blacklist pressures for periods of time. So the banishment here is political era exclusion, guilt by association, and sponsor fear overriding bookings. Bean was treated as too risky for high-visibility television during that fearful period. The key point is he was kept off the show during the blacklist climate for controversy management rather than performance quality. Bean's name appeared on publications and lists that circulated through Hollywood identifying alleged communist sympathizers. These lists weren't official government documents, but they carried enormous weight with sponsors and advertisers. Campbell Soup and other major sponsors threatened to pull their advertising money if certain names appeared on shows they funded. Sullivan had to choose between his performers and his sponsors, and the money always won. Bean later said he understood Sullivan was trapped by the system, even though it destroyed careers. The blacklist era created an atmosphere where accusations alone could end your television career overnight. Bean's work dried up almost completely during this period, forcing him to find income outside mainstream entertainment. When Sullivan finally brought him back years later, the damage to Bean's career had already been done. Number 6. Jerome Robbins.
Pleased to announce a comedy.
Robbins is frequently cited as one of the prominent figures who faced intense pressure in the early 1950s, including leverage tied to his private life. Reporting and retrospectives describe claims that Ed Sullivan as a powerful media figure threatened to expose personal information, and Robbins feared complete career destruction if he didn't comply with Sullivan's demands. A Los Angeles Times retrospective explicitly names Robbins among entertainers Sullivan banned from the show during that period. The key mechanism wasn't bad TV behavior, but Sullivan's enforcement of control through fear and punishment by booking. Because accounts vary in detail, the safest summary is that Robbins was caught in Sullivan's sphere of influence, and Sullivan is repeatedly described as orchestrating the exclusion. This kind of ban was not driven by performance quality or professional conduct. Robbins was one of the most talented choreographers and directors in American theater at the time. His work on Broadway shows like West Side Story proved his genius, but none of that talent protected him from Sullivan's pressure. Ed allegedly used private information about Robbins as leverage to force him to make career-ending decisions. The claim was simple: comply with what was being demanded or have damaging personal details exposed publicly to destroy his reputation. Robbins eventually made choices that destroyed friendships and professional relationships throughout his career. The guilt from those decisions haunted him for the rest of his life, according to people close to him. Sullivan's role in pressuring Robbins remains one of the darkest allegations against him as a television host. The power Sullivan wielded extended far beyond television bookings into people's private lives and personal secrets. Number 7. Paul Draper. Paul Draper's blacklist was rooted in the commonly known Red Scare era, when careers could be derailed by accusations and sponsor fear, rather than anything done on stage. Reports describe his association with controversy leading to TV opportunities being cut or withdrawn, including material linked to the Sullivan-CBS orbit being dropped under pressure. Draper got swept into a wider storm of allegations and legal conflict that kept his name politically hot even when facts were disputed. In that climate, a major sponsor-friendly variety show had strong incentives to keep distance from anyone considered radioactive. So his ban reads less like a single incident and more like a calculation to avoid the risk of booking. Even without a courtroom conviction, mere suspicion could make a name undesirable to sponsors and network executives. Draper was a renowned tap dancer who'd performed for presidents and in the finest theaters across America. His talent was undisputed, but his alleged associations made him untouchable to mainstream television. The accusations stemmed from anti-communist activist groups who published names of suspected sympathizers. Draper fought back legally against some accusers, but the damage was done before cases could be resolved. His bookings disappeared almost overnight as producers and networks avoided anyone on the blacklist. Sullivan's show was one of many that closed their doors to Draper during this period. The economic impact was devastating, forcing Draper to eventually leave the United States to find work. He spent years performing in Europe where similar paranoia hadn't destroyed entertainment opportunities. The blacklist effectively exiled him from his own country. Number 8. Leon Bibb.
When John Henry was a little baby, sitting on his mammy's.
Bibb's reported Sullivan ban is tied to the civil rights era and association with blacklisted artists. An LA Times obituary states Bibb was banned in the mid-1960s because of his support for Pete Seeger and Paul Robeson, both prominent targets of blacklists. Another detailed retelling says Sullivan pressed Bibb to disavow that support, including a statement or signing, and Bibb refused, triggering the ban. Either way, the common thread is that Bibb's stance and affiliations were viewed as unacceptable in a sponsor-sensitive, blacklist-influenced environment. So, the ban wasn't a performance fail, it was punishment for refusing to distance himself from controversial figures. The controversy comes from the idea that suspicion could outweigh merit and silence entertainers. Bibb's talent didn't matter when this kind of stuff got involved. Ed allegedly gave Bibb an ultimatum to publicly denounce Seeger and Robeson or lose access to the Ed Sullivan Show. Bibb chose loyalty to his friends over his career, which shows incredible courage given what was at stake. Pete Seeger had been blacklisted for years over alleged communist ties, despite being one of America's greatest folk musicians. Paul Robeson faced similar persecution for his activism and support of civil rights. By supporting them, Bibb placed himself in the crosshairs of the same machinery. Sullivan's demand that Bibb sign a statement disavowing them was a loyalty test Bibb refused to pass. The ban effectively ended the sight of Bibb from mainstream television during the peak of his career. His principled stand cost him financially, but he never expressed regret about supporting his friends. Bibb's story shows how the blacklist destroyed careers of people who simply refused to betray their values. Number 9. The Byrds. The Byrds never got another invitation because of what happened off camera, not because of what the audience heard. Accounts say a confrontation broke out behind the scenes involving David Crosby and the show's production team. On a fast-paced variety program, arguing with the crew was treated as a direct challenge to authority and could disrupt timing and control. Instead of making it public, the show's response was quiet and simple. They just stopped extending invitations. In other words, it functioned like a ban, even if it was enforced by silence rather than an announcement. When a show felt a guest brought chaos or disrespect, the easiest response was simply to never rebook them. Crosby's attitude rubbed producers the wrong way, and Sullivan decided they were more trouble than they were worth. The Byrds had just come off a massively successful appearance in 1965 that should have guaranteed return bookings. Their folk rock sound was perfect for Sullivan's audience, and Mr. Tambourine Man was dominating the charts. But Crosby's backstage behavior destroyed that goodwill in a single afternoon. Multiple band members later confirmed the argument happened, though details about what triggered it remain unclear. Crosby had a reputation throughout his career for being difficult and speaking his mind without filters. On Sullivan's tightly controlled show, that attitude was career poison. Roger McGuinn and the other members were reportedly furious with Crosby for burning that bridge. The ban meant they missed opportunities to promote future hits on the biggest television platform in America. Crosby's ego cost the entire band access to millions of viewers. The timing couldn't have been worse, as they were releasing albums that needed television exposure to reach the masses. Chris Hillman later confirmed in interviews that Crosby's confrontation with the director ended their relationship with Ed permanently. Sullivan's bookers allegedly told other industry contacts that the Byrds were hard to work with too, which may or may not have affected them in terms of getting booked on other shows or stations. The rest of the band tried to distance themselves from Crosby's actions, but the damage was collective. Years later, when the Byrds had lineup changes and Crosby was gone, they still couldn't get back on the show. Number 10. Larry Adler. Adler's exclusion is part of the same era machinery that hit Draper with accusations and industry suspicion, shaping who could appear on major sponsored broadcasts. Multiple sources describe Adler being blacklisted and eventually relocating to the UK after the US controversy intensified, including the well-known dispute involving accusations and a libel suit. The key reason is not a single Sullivan Show incident, but the era's gatekeeping with sponsors, networks, and high-profile hosts avoiding anyone labeled controversial. So Adler's ban wasn't related to any sort of performance misconduct. On these kinds of shows, a single accusation could be enough to trigger a sponsor veto before rehearsals even began. Network lawyers and advertisers wanted zero chance of being accused of giving a platform to someone considered controversial by certain groups. Watch lists and similar documents circulated like cheat sheets for who to avoid in radio and television, and Adler got swept into that pipeline. Once that label stuck, producers treated him like a risk that could explode into headlines and cost the show real money. Affiliates could threaten not to carry an episode, and that leverage scared executives more than any musical gamble. Agents stopped pitching him because every booking request turned into an interrogation instead of a talent discussion. Even sympathetic colleagues hesitated to defend him publicly because association with controversy could spread the stain to them next. The exclusion didn't just shut down television slots, it could choke off radio bookings, concert promoters, and record opportunities in the same sweep. Venues that once begged for his name started acting like they'd never heard of him because nobody wanted controversy at the box office. He wasn't just losing gigs, he was losing access to the entire American pipeline that turned a performer into a household name. That pressure forced hard choices fast, and the safest path became leaving rather than begging gatekeepers for permission to exist. He faced significant obstacles in the United States entertainment market that weren't about his musicianship. Adler was a brilliant harmonica player, but that didn't matter when the climate made him radioactive to sponsors. Allegations in certain publications destroyed his American career almost overnight. Adler filed suits against his accusers, trying to clear his name through the courts, but the legal battles dragged on for years, costing him money and show gigs. With no work in the U.S., Adler made the painful decision to leave the country. The exile lasted decades, and Adler never fully recovered the fame in the U.S. he once had. Do you think Ed's decisions here are justified? Or do you think the network and their extremely strict rules played a bigger role in this entire thing? Honestly, some of these bans seem totally unfair to me, but I guess it was just a different time for television. Let us know your thoughts about these stories below in the comments section, and check out this channel's other videos by clicking the recommended video you see on screen for more deep dives into crazy talk show moments and backstories just like this.